Wasn't Socrates a mason? Weren't the most prodigious of people in society? Didn't they work with their hands? And I want to extrapolate a rational maxim, if you will, from those who work with their hands. Like moving stuff, picking stuff up, building stuff. They're more centered in reality than your average academic, in my opinion, in my experience, and in my assessment and of those I respect and have admired and continue to admire. So, when you're reading and you're getting into sort of, abstract la la land, using a word to describe a word to describe a word, euphemisms and such, you can get lost quite easily. But if someone's like, hey, pick up that brick over there, you're not going to think to yourself, what's another word for brick, right? What's another word for a word that describes, the sort of super category of brick, what else is like a brick, you might be thinking those things to yourself as you're working, kind of just, if that's your fancy, if you will, or I guess if you have that sort of personality, intelligence, or uh, maybe sort of some may say lack of sociability instead of talking to your coworkers or teammates, you're thinking to yourself about, this, that, the other. Well, you'll get lost quite quickly, right? When you're working with your hands, it's very easy to, if you're not focused exactly what's in front of you, like what's in front of me right now, a 5.7 inch by 3 point something inch touchscreen. But just a second ago, I wasn't thinking about that, although my gaze was pointed in that direction. And so, when you're working with your hands, you're more fluid in the gist of the second to second, hands touchy kind of reality, which is way more objective than most philosophical history. Most philosophical history is theoretical, and it's there's no rubber that ever meets the road. It's like, oh well, this is how the rubber will eventually meet the road, or this is how the rubber already met the road, right, with no sort of proofs or anything. Just, oh, you have to accept these things, and if you don't, then you're a they won't say this in their books, but other people at the time of these sort of quote unquote great works, you'd be considered a moron. Again, these are the people who are, these are the people who I'm talking the philosophers that were backed by the state, and so I'm not talking about your Aristotle and such, and your Socrates and Plato to a degree, but not I'm not even talking about him. But you know, it's very easy to get the more you learn about language, the easier it is to get lost. But quite simply, how do you snap back into reality? Simply, snap the fingers in from your hand. That's basically how you get back to reality. And it seems like, well, wait a second, why, how is this even a video? Like, why would this even be, a topic for philosophy? Well, again, like I said before, is that philosophers, you can get very much lost very quickly in the sort of in the abstract world, if you will. The definitions are your way out of getting lost, of course. But that I pay homage, sort of, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual homage to, those, and myself included. That's what I've done. Now I've made like 99.9% of my money from the free market is through, outside of family and such, is through just simply doing physical labor. And of course, physical labor, it's not, I'm not talking about building houses, I'm not talking about just building houses. I'm talking about, using your your physical dexterity to interact with the world and get resources that way. So selling books, I mean, yeah, obviously you got to get out there, right? You got to, so you got to walk, get out the door, and all that kind of stuff, and traverse the sort of territory and put yourself out there. Maybe make signs, you know, uh, you know, uh, sign books. I don't know, fill out greeting cards or something, send emails. I mean, these are all physical things too, right? And writing is physical things. Opening and flipping pages and scrolling through is physical things. I'm not knocking and degrading these things. I'm just saying, you know, if you get something wrong and it's just a theory that you can just toss aside, if you're theorizing, in your bed, it's a lot different than building the foundation to a house, right, and following a blueprint. But again, there's, again, you can go either way with this because, if you make a habit of just making bad theories, right, and thinking it's a joke and thinking it's all fun and games, well, I mean, that's cool and all, but you're building I mean, what starts as cobwebs eventually turns into cement, right, as the saying goes. And so, I mean, if you've built those crevices within sort of, that part of your brain where it becomes comfortable and you become relaxed with making these lazy, bogus theories, well, I mean, eventually you're just going to be so disconnected from reality that, you know, you're not going to like breathe. It's going to like you're going to question things that are just not even necessarily question things, but you're going to be worse than irrelevant. Like you're going to be uh, a crux that needs to be you know I mean knocked out of the way essentially. I mean, if someone calls himself a philosopher and they just engage these sort of like pompous, even just outside of the outside of I'm not talking even just about the sort of delusions that philosophers can be succumbed with from their own stifled thinking, but when they're not grounded in concrete reality. Um, I'm talking also just people just developing these pompous theories like um, well you're not a philosopher unless you have a PhD. You can't be like you're just an internet philosopher, right? Like you see these. I've traversed Reddit a little bit on the philosophy side of things, and that's oh Reddit philosophers, I got something for you, and it's like okay, so as soon as you get off Reddit, you're no longer a philosopher. So that doesn't make any sense because when you're on Reddit, you're not actually inside of the computer. You're not actually inside of the webosphere, if you will. You're not actually inside the telephone pole wire, or the DSL cables that are linking up the internet connection to your computer hardware or phone hardware into your or the Wi-Fi connection into your that's being displayed onto your screen. So it's first of all, it's a very sloppy and sloppy form of an ad hominem attack, right? So that's not an argument. That's not philosophy, just to be clear. So yes, you can make arguments on the internet and still be a philosopher, and you don't have to, hold a PhD or have a PhD hanging behind you to be a philosopher. So I just want to, so that's what I mean by the pompous sort of philosophers who I think are getting in the way of good, real philosophy. Because if you make it so that it's that nobody can only the only people who can be philosophers are those who are born to like the right family and who just have a certain amount of financial wealth behind them, then you automatically say to basically you're saying F you to everybody else, which is the vast, way more than the vast majority of people. And so that is not the greatest thing. I mean, we have philosophers from Asia, from South America. I mean, my type of philosophers are, the Roman ancient Roman, Greek philosophers. Those are my kind of philosophers, and I think those are the best philosophers. I think the Western train of philosophy is the best of all philosophy. But I'm not saying, well, you're, I'm right and you're wrong because, my skin color. I mean, that would be an obviously, I mean, we already modern, accept that, just that's not an argument. Like skin color is an argument in that sense. But I mean, people don't recognize that in terms of quote unquote credentials. Now, of course, I get the point of being credentialed, and I get, I respect people who are credentialed. I'm not devaluing them. I'm just saying, you can figure out stuff, and you can, I mean, people, look at some of the great people who've gone and graduated from MIT who come from, sort of very very downtrodden parts of Africa, right? The sort of poorest parts of the continent, and they taught themselves how to do things when everyone else was just, swatting flies or whatever else. Maybe they got lucky and they were, avoid like the lion just avoided them, or those sort of those kinds of freaky gangs out there just didn't come after them for whatever reason. But it's yeah, sure, some luck to the draw. But I think that if you come from this lifestyle, it's a sort of privileged lifestyle to come from, where you had your family backing you up to go to this kind of Ivy League college to begin with, and to set your groundwork for that destination for you. I think that you could at the very least just admit, like, hey, maybe people who have no degree, right, have something to say and have something of value to add to philosophy. And again, this is why the internet, is hated by so many older people. It's not because they just don't want to learn. Like me, I get it. Like there's only so much time in the day. I mean, learning, it's harder to learn new things as you get older. I get that, but I think it's more the hate, right? Because I mean, I don't hate the Hebrew text because I'm not reading it. I just simply don't read it because, I'm doing what I've already been doing with that allotted time that I had previously. I'm not changing that because I don't want to read the Hebrew text, quite simply. It's a tautology, but, there's going to be a reason for me to read the Hebrew text. And, it's like the same, there's got to be a reason, I think, for older people to get to know the internet. And, a lot of older people do know the internet, but, there's a lot more who don't. Sort of the boomer generation doesn't know much about the internet, and that is, I think it's more of a, oh well, all these kids, all these young the generation, millennial generation and such, they're just, on the internet too much. And then you have the technological generation, and sure, they are. We are on the internet too much. But again, it's compared to what? So you can judge something negatively, but a negative judgment isn't a call to change behavior, right? Um, like I can say, yeah, my beard doesn't look that great, and maybe I should shave it. It doesn't mean that it's compared to what, right? It's compared to what. So should I, it's and you can say this for anything. And so it's just like, by what standard are you judging something? So if you're saying that, because something is a bad habit, they should change their behavior, first you would have to define what it is that you mean by a bad habit. Because if it's a bad habit to use the internet, say, for more than 3 hours a day, then what would you be filling up that time with? What if that individual, if you're talking about an individual in specific, I mean, you can't use a generality to define to tell an individual what to do, firstly. But if you were to tell an individual what to do in this sense, then you would have to know what their alternatives are, right? And you would have to, and in order to understand that, that would take a lot of, for it to be philosophy, that would take a lot of poking and prodding at the different variables of that individual, and that of that individual's surroundings. So it's not as simple as saying, oh, shame on you, you use the internet, or you know this and that about technology, so we're putting you into this basket. I mean, of course, I mean that's how we all do with each other, but I mean, I'm just saying that it doesn't mean that you have to change your behavior. I mean, I don't think people understand this enough, at least in the West. I mean, maybe in Jerusalem, where they're actually, people are staunchly criticizing each other left and right, from what I'm hearing, and the criticism is openly touted and praised and valued. But right now, what we're going through in the West, again, I'm not sure how it was 50 years ago, as much as other people may know, but it seems to be getting worse, where criticism is it's like a death threat. Um, of course, this could just be my experience, but from everything that I'm seeing, right, this could be confirmation bias, right? But from everything from what I'm seeing is that, there's certain, lines of communication that are open, like, we can debate in theory about, like gender, as long as you're on this, as long as you're sympathetic towards, the woman's perspective, and that woman's perspective is a democratic socialistic perspective, of course. Um, so, Laura Loomer, for example, would be the exception to that. That would be, where we are in society. So yeah, I think, and I agree with Stefan Molyneux's recent video about how, we have free speech in theory. We don't have free speech in practice. Free speech in practice is like, you got to be rich, right? You got to be rich because you have to have all these bodyguards, and you have to have like all these, or at least one backer who just, like, oh yeah, here's $20,000 for security and such. Like, you can't call the police and tell them like you're going to have this event, because they're going to say, oh, we're just going to shut the event down, right? They're gonna call the hotel. You have it at a hotel. Like if you had it at a library, I tried doing this before, where I tried having events at an event at the library. And they said, oh no, we're not going to do that. We're just not going to do it. Oh, you haven't done it before? Oh, then we're not going to do it. So like it's not, they make it so that then it's like it's so easy. Like I can just turn my phone on, and I can talk, or I can make a post on Facebook or something, and I can add people on Facebook, and it's an open platform, right? You can lie about your name, you can lie about your age, you can, for the most part, for most of these social websites, and it's so easy. But you go to a library, and it's like or you try to get something going at at a hotel or something, and rent a room out of a hotel or something, and to use, and from what I understand, it's not all that pretty. It's a pretty difficult process. I mean, this is the world. This is the free market, right? But it's largely the reason it's such a challenging thing is because of all of the socialistic goop that's swelling the marketplace, which is just like, let's flood in first world countries with a bunch of third world people. And it's not so much that we're being flooded with third world immigrants, it's that we're having policies that reflect that. So we're competing for the same jobs, when you come from a place where you're used to getting paid maybe not even 5 cents an hour, and like just barely being able to scrape crumbs together to for bread to live for the day. And then you come to a place where you're getting paid so much more per capita, then of course, like, you're gonna want to work so much, you're just going to be relieved, and you're probably going to be a better worker in the earlier stages. But I mean, from this is what it looks cosmetically to people who are making these higher, and they're not. I don't think most employers are well versed in sort of IQ scores, and and IQ differences, and race relations and such. And so corporate do this. I mean, they can't make it obvious that they're discriminating for IQ, because then, right, they're going to have nothing but whites and Asians working for their company. So that's kind of sad. So I mean, it's I mean, facts are facts, right? I mean, again, don't shoot the messenger. Facts are just facts. So if and this is coming from someone who is a mixed race, by the way. So and it's kind of fun to be in an ironic kind of way, because people, when they think of, I think people are naturally empirical. And so when someone's like, oh, it's especially, to a white person, right? They're not going to say this to a Muslim, right? They're not going to go to a Muslim, oh, you're a racist, right? They're not going to say that to a Muslim. They'll go up to Whitey and be like, right, and they'll call him Whitey, by the way. This is their lingo. This is what the sort of radical, maybe not radical, but just like leftist online black people who want to, you know, just cause eugenics will say online, like, right, they call white people whiteys and such, and you call a black person blackie. I mean, oh, you're just like the worst person in the world. But again, they just they cherry pick history in a way that conforms to their sort of inflated sense of victimhood, and it's such a paralyzing situation. I mean, if you can admit failure, you can succeed in life, right? Like every time you fail, you learn from your mistakes, you gain the wisdom to know, what it is that you did wrong and what you could have done differently, and perhaps have better suited yourself by doing. And perhaps you shouldn't have taken the risk to begin with, and that's the knowledge in and of itself. But you can't learn if you don't accept failure. And if I just say, I'm a failure because, for example, the Jewish question, right? All the Jews are out to get me or something, or if I like, I'm not Jewish, so I won't ever succeed in like any sort of intellectual pursuit. If I say that to myself over and over again, this is sort of, neuro-linguistic programming that goes on in the brain, and eventually, you become your own what you believe, right? If you, what's that sort of quote? I think it's from Candide, thinking if you believe you can do it, then you can. If you believe you can't, you can't. And so, it's as simple as that. That's at least how, that's how you should plant your seed crop, you know what I mean? And so if you want to be successful. But I think a lot of people, and people who are politically charged in particular, is that they don't want to be successful. They just want to be reactionary and have a dog in the fight. And the dog in the fight that supplies the adrenaline for them is their very nature of existence. And so if they're not, doing meme wars and such, again, I'm not saying I've never done this, and I'm not knocking people who do it. I'm just saying this is their identity. And so their identity doesn't lie in fact-seeking, truth-seeking philosophy. It's just getting a reaction and having a dog in the fight that they can call their own. And so, so that's where we are today in society. And so there's no rules, right? So I mean, if you have any learning and moral philosophy, it all goes out the window when you're dealing with an Antifa thug at a sort of, at a Trump rally, for example. And so, I'm not saying you preemptively strike an individual and run from them. I'm just saying it doesn't mean anything. Like, you can't negotiate, right? You're not going to negotiate with a starving bear with rabies. It makes no sense. And so, what can you do in that situation? And that's where we are right now in the West. So yeah, tricky times, tricky times for survival and for philosophy, for trying to be as least diluted as possible. It's a very, very interesting time because we have the internet, and they're not going to take away the internet from the world. That's impossible. By they, I mean like government officials and such. I mean the sort of Alex Jones types will say, oh, this, you get the Bilderbergers, and it doesn't matter. You can't take away. It's impossible to take away the internet. There's too many people, and the elites have children too, and they go to stores or they buy groceries. I mean, they may do it all online and have it delivered by especially, VIPs and such, but I mean, they're interacting with society just like me and you are. I mean, they have a sewage system and such. And so it's not like, the sort of Alex Jones conspiracy nuts will say, things like, oh, they're trying to take over the world and they're going to take away the internet. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It only takes a moment of skepticism to realize, rational skepticism, to realize that would never happen. They'll take you away your individual rights, right? They'll target you individually, but they won't do it in a collective mass scale. So don't prepare for something that's impossible. That's just a waste of time. So, so that's of course, there's avenues to resist against that as well. But anyway, so yeah, so case in point, philosophy is alive and well. It's just right now the only philosophy that really exists is with people who are in physical labor. Just simple negotiation. And of course, we're having the labor saving devices that are eliminating these jobs, and so this is where it kind of gets. It's kind of interesting because we have all this information at our fingertips, but the more information we have, the more propaganda that's getting out there because of the algorithms, such of the suppression of information that's deemed radical, which is another way of just saying contra narrative, right? So it's yeah, very interesting times. So labor is where people are grounded in reality, and of course, the people who are doing the labor are the men, and the men are men are being heavily looked down upon, by particularly white men are being heavily looked down upon by camp type people. So, again, I'm not, I'm talking new age feminism. I'm not talking old school feminism, like, give women the vote. So that's, it's particularly wild. It's just a wild time to be alive. So, I mean, I'm grateful to be alive during this time in this world. To see this kind of stuff happen, and even just the last 7 days or so have been, 14 days is completely wild. And you learn a lot, and philosophy is the guidestone for being able to live productively in the world. You can be a parasite, but I mean, you define yourself as a parasite, then I mean, you can you can still be philosophical and be a parasite, right? You can still be a North Korean dictator and be philosophical, right? But then there's good and evil, right? So, um, yeah, it begins with labor. Um, because if you just, again, the last point I'll make is that if you just have people reading texts and exchanging, quotes from books and saying, well, this philosopher's right, here and here and here, and this one's right here, here and here, like you don't get anywhere. Like you have to learn how to think and navigate through the world with your cognition. Again, if I'm speaking specifically for philosophically minded people. And if you don't, then I mean, you're a screw with the grooves, waiting for the screwdriver, right, to turn you either clockwise or counterclockwise, right? You're only going to go one of two directions, and so you're either gonna do what that person says, or you're gonna not do what that person says or tries to get you to do. And that's pretty much right. That's pretty much that's pretty much. Nietzsche called it slave morality, where the slaves would praise they would feel high and mighty for being a slave, um, by I think that's Christianity. That's how we define Christianity, and that's that's something just keep in mind that you can be the screwdriver, right? You can be the screwdriver, or you can simply be the dragon, right? You can, fly where you want, camp where you want. I would say transformer, because there is no such thing as a ruler. Talking about the individuals who claim to have power over you, in the sense that we're humans. We all have our own individual talents, specialties, skills, attributes, taller, shorter, wider, bigger hips, um, different jazz individual differences and our predilections towards, science or music or being more likely to be addicted to alcohol, drugs, etc. But at the end of the day, nobody can tell you individually what to do. If they do, then they're automatically saying that if I say, you have to pick up, that car, that toy car in the middle of the road, if I say that to you, I'm automatically saying that it's a universal rule for me to be told what to do. Let's just say a stranger, by a stranger. So that means you can then turn around and tell that person, no, you pick up that car in the middle of the road, right? And if they say no, then you have the very same justification that they use to say no, right? They might say, well, I have a PhD in philosophy. Well, that's interesting. So did Socrates have a PhD in philosophy, right? Did your grandmother have a PhD in philosophy, right? Did that person at the DMV who issued you your license have a PhD in philosophy, right? So you just point out the contradictions, because it's not a syllogistical argument, it's not a deductive argument, it's not a principled argument, right? He's not arguing, he's not using any sort of axiomatic claims to support his argument. He's simply saying, over you, listen to me, yada yada, right? There's no reason. It's like you're looking at a reptile, foam's coming out of its mouth, and you just want to recognize a reptile for what it is, right? It's just a reptile. And so, that's what philosophy does for you, is you recognize that nobody has power over you. I mean, that's why I don't understand why more people aren't into philosophy. I don't know. Is it too taxing? Is it just I don't know. Maybe it's just I'm weird and I love philosophy, and perfectly willing to accept that. But I don't. This it's not a proof. An opinion doesn't mean, you know. So that's my homage to the labor force. It gets the gears moving, right? It gets the gears moving into thinking, what it is that is real, and the question of reality is one of philosophy, through and through, right? Anything that has to do with existence, reality, the brain is completely philosophical, and it started originally from philosophy, and so this is also in the West why we have moving of the statues and everything. I don't know if this happens as much in Australia, but I think right now this is mainly just a Western thing right now, is that removing all these old statues because they don't want people to remember their history. They want, like, if you can be eviscerated from your history, then you can be printed upon, and so they can say, well, we don't have those documents, right? Just like what they did with the Jews, right? They burned all their books, and I know Sigmund Freud had basically all his works burned, um, and even if they don't burn the works, at the very least they destroy them. And so that's this is they also, I mean, they did this. They used to do this to, I mean, they did the same thing to witches as well. In the 15th century when they're doing the witch trials, when Christians were doing witch trials. So I mean, yeah, I mean, but the Christians are the convenient ones to criticize, right? Nobody's going out there criticizing Muslims, right? Like they're criticizing Christians. Nobody is criticizing, Orientals or blacks or Asians or South Americans, the way that they're criticizing white people, right? In particular, again, white men. So that's, you know, that's something to just, and that's actually why I'm, yeah, I'm mostly white, but I identify, almost solely with my white race because it's almost like it's a reaction to all the hatred that is in the air that's towards white males, and I just don't like it. And so, is it a healthy or productive reaction? Probably not. But I mean, we're not here. We can't Monday night quarterback this kind of thing, right? This is an on the run thing. So, you know, if I mean the white race, what are we 4%? I don't think I can look up as well. I'm doing this. 4% of the population. Asians are the biggest race in the world today. They're continuing to get more and more complex with designing 200 IQ babies now. They're looking into the research to be able to develop 200 IQ babies. I mean, how can we compete, right? And then, you look up inventions, and almost everything that has been invented and that everything that we use today in modernity is made by a white man, but they're just completely demonized. Right? And so it's like, let's just completely destroy society because, it's fun, right? It's hellacious, barbaric, brutal, terrible, traumatic, devouring, vampiric, hellacious, satanic, evil. At its very core. But that's where we are, right? So how do you I mean, you either change, right? Because you can either improve the society or you can flee from it. I mean, there's no really alternative, right? You either fight or flee. There's no alternative. To freeze is to die, and to accept defeat is to die, right? To die inwardly, right? You become. This is why zombie movies are so popular. Is because most of us are dead, right? Most of us are dead, right? We can't have a voice of our own. We have to repeat what everyone else says. We have to, we can't repeat what we think to be true if someone else says something that we believe to be true first, if it doesn't conform to, the overall overarching general consensus or our culture, narrative, what have you. And so, this is why philosophy is just man, it's a diamond that's there and people step on it. And, it's, I don't think it, I wasn't surprised, for people watching this in the future, it's not it wasn't ever a surprise to me. I've been subscribed to Stefan Molyneux for going on 10 years. It was never a surprise to me that he was going to become as popular as he is today. Like, I never said, wow, I never pictured that happening. I mean, I was surprised how quickly it happened, but I never didn't think it would happen. And it's just like philosophy is just one of those things. That's how you get your ticket to freedom, happiness, salvation, sovereignty, goodness, virtue, love, life. Life in the sense like where you actually feel like you're alive. And I just, they say that, to see the form is to leave it. And I think that the sustenance has been so bred out of people, the sustenance of life, that I think people forget that that life is actually worth living outside of hedonism, right? Outside of, just like, oh, this pleasurable thing to that pleasurable thing. And so, this is where, I think physical labor is a great thing because, yeah, it's pleasurable, but it's also productive. I mean, for the moment, you're not going to be engaged in physical labor unless you're getting paid for it, right? You're expending energy, and by golly gee whiz, you wouldn't be here if you weren't expending energy in a productive fashion, especially, physically, like with your hands and feet, I mean. And so that's, so yeah, I think the value of physical labor is largely underestimated by academics, except for people like Charles Murray. He gets it. So, yeah, that's the best